Hi there! Welcome to Pallet University. So today we're going to be talking about two new Pokemon introduced in Pokemon Sword and Shield, which are Galarian Corsola and its new evolution, Corsola, and how they're not exactly what they seem. I was actually in the process of writing this script when I noticed that a great colleague in the study of Pokemon, Birdkeeper Toby, posted a video about these spooky new corals as well, so I thought I'd take a look at it. And you definitely should too, because it's a video for #TeamTrees. If you are at all possible to donate to this amazing cause, it's $1 equals one tree planted, and we're all responsible for producing carbon dioxide, and because of that we all should be also responsible for removing as much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as we possibly can, and this is a fantastic way to do it. Anyway, back to Corsola. So Toby's video essentially said that because of how industrial the Galar region is, that caused some climate change which turned regular Johtonian Corsola into this Galarian ghostly Corsola, because it's based off of corals being bleached. And in our world, this is absolutely true. Back in March, I had the incredible opportunity to go down to Belize in Central America to do some field work, and part of that involved snorkeling on the coral reefs off of the coast in the Caribbean Sea. And while these barrier reefs aren't the most impacted by climate change, aren't the most bleached compared to, say, like the Great Barrier Reef off of Australia, you could definitely still see it if you were looking for it. So before getting into what is perhaps a better fit for Corsola's lore compared to Toby's hypothesis, let's talk about corals themselves first and how they work in our world. Corals are members of the phylum Cnidaria, which is mostly known for jellyfish. That's like sort of the quintessential Cnidarian. Essentially, corals are just little tiny jellyfish that instead of moving around like this, they sort of just flip themselves upside down and wave their tentacles around in the water while they secrete a skeleton of calcium carbonate to support themselves. Here's an actual anatomical diagram of what corals look like. When you get down to it, it really is just a little jellyfish. Like jellyfish, they have stingers on their tentacles that sort of catch food that sort of flows by, but because corals are much smaller, their prey is much smaller, so they mostly feed off of plankton, things like very, very small embryos of things like crabs that sort of float around in the water, and things like that. However, corals are not very efficient at this though. And over the hundreds of millions of years that they've been around, they've evolved this symbiotic relationship with protists that do photosynthesis, and these protists live in their tissues and are called zooxanthellae. These are what give corals their beautiful colors. And essentially how it works is the protists do photosynthesis, which is why corals need to be closer to the surface of the water. They live in relatively shallow water. And so these zooxanthellae basically do photosynthesis, which provides energy for the coral, and then the coral, by its fishing essentially, snagging these little plankton out of the water, they provide nutrients that the zooxanthellae need to be able to do this photosynthesis. So it works both ways, and it's greatly beneficial not just to the corals and to the zooxanthellae, but literally to the entire planet. Because coral reefs are some of the most biologically productive environments on the planet, second only, I think, to rainforests and kelp forests. Unfortunately, these protists are extraordinarily picky, and they require a very, very specific and narrow range of both temperature and acidity for them to be able to do what they do. And that is really why corals are being hit the hardest out of basically any group of organisms by climate change. As ocean temperatures and acidity increase because of increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide, the zooxanthellae basically freak out and leave the tissues of the coral to try and find a better environment for themselves. This is what turns the corals white, because the corals don't actually die when this happens. It just makes it so that they're see-through because they're so small, so you can see the calcium carbonate, which is essentially chalk, underneath the actual tissues of the coral. Without these zooxanthellae, they basically starve to death because they are still collecting food, but that food is not enough to sustain themselves for long periods of time. And if the conditions return very quickly to conditions that the zooxanthellae like, then they can actually be reabsorbed into the coral's tissue, and the coral will carry on basically fine. However, this almost never happens. The only reason that we know that this happens is because we did it in a lab and tested it out, not because it's something that's actually commonplace or observable out in nature. And this whole idea of bleached coral is what is the basis of Galarian Corsola and Corsola. However, the Pokédex, in its infinite wisdom, directly contradicts this in my opinion. Galarian Corsola's Pokédex entry from Pokemon Shield says, sudden climate change wiped out this ancient kind of Corsola, which to me implies that this was the original Corsola that Johtonian Corsola sort of diverged from. My hypothesis is that this climate change shifted things in a way that made these zooxanthellae, these protists, happy, and into conditions that they like. So they were able to, be absorbed into Galarian Corsola's tissues, turning it into the Johtonian Corsola that we've known since like 1999, while at the same time removing its ability to evolve. And there's even a little tiny shred of evidence about both Corsolas that sort of backs this up. Johtonian Corsola learns the move Recover, as well as has the abilities Regenerator and Natural Cure, whereas Galarian Corsola doesn't have any of these. And these things, these attributes are, they make sense for a coral. Corals are actually surprisingly good at regenerating themselves if the conditions are proper. There's some species of coral that actually only sort of propagate themselves by when they're broken up by storms. That's just how they sort of spread themselves. However, like I said, Galarian Corsola doesn't have access to any of these, and instead it relies on the move Strength Sap to restore its health, drawing in from the life force of other organisms around it. I personally don't think it would be too big of a leap to think that when Johtonian Corsola uses any of its healing abilities, it's actually just using Strength Sap on its zooxanthellae. So, in reality, this climate change that is referenced in the Pokédex may actually have helped Corsola to be able to better adapt to different environments such as Johto, Hoenn, and Alola. Climate change is really only a problem for some organisms. For example, there are lots of organisms that can really only live in lower latitudes around the equator, but as temperatures increase, we're starting to see them migrating north. Animals that normally live in Central America and Mexico are being found in, northern Texas, in central North America. Things that have never really been seen before in those areas. For those specific animals, having access to a larger range is very beneficial for them. That being said, humans will not be one of the winners out of climate change. When it comes to climate change, it's not the magnitude of the change, it's the rate at which it happens. So, a 2 degree Celsius difference might not seem like much, it changes more than that throughout a single day. But when it happens in such a short period of time globally, that can be extremely deadly. An analogy that I like to use to explain it to sort of the non-scientist uses cars, which is something that is much easier to understand just because we're all surrounded by cars pretty much all the time. If you're in a car that goes 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 10 seconds, you'll notice it, but you won't feel it all that much. It's not going to put that much force on your body. Whereas if you were to go 0 to 60 in 0.1 seconds, you would probably die. The amount of change stays the same, but it's how quickly that change happens that is what's really devastating virtually every single environment on our planet. As a paleontologist, I have a really unique and in-depth understanding of how changes throughout Earth's history have affected the life that was on the planet at the time that most other people don't have. So let me share a couple of facts with you. The last time that atmospheric carbon dioxide was increasing at the levels we see today was the end Triassic mass extinction. During that mass extinction, roughly all of what is now India was covered in lava. The entire subcontinent of India was an erupting volcano. And during that mass extinction, 75% of all species went extinct. The time before that was the end Permian mass extinction, when virtually all, not quite all, but almost all, of what's now Russia. Think of how big that is. All of Russia was an erupting volcano, covered in roughly a kilometer of lava. During that time, 95% of all species went extinct, and that's a pretty conservative estimate. Most people think that it's somewhere between 95 and 99% of all species. In paleontology, we refer to that mass extinction as the Great Dying. Life almost ceased to exist. That is not an exaggeration. So, when people say that Earth's climate changes all the time, they're not technically wrong, but they're really missing the point. When the climate changes this fast, a lot of things die. And if we don't take drastic action soon, a relatively young species called Homo sapiens may be one of the species that go extinct in this current mass extinction. Climate activism is something that I am extremely passionate about, and I've been looking for a way to introduce the topic on this channel in a way that made sense, that wasn't just me talking at you about climate change. So thank you, Galarian Corsola. You're actually not just the competitive monster that you are, you're also very helpful to science. People too often politicize climate change, but it's really not a political issue. It's a human issue. It's a human issue that's going to affect everyone eventually, and it's going to affect the people who are least able to protect themselves from the effects the first and hardest. So I really want to stress that if it is at all financially possible for you to donate to #TeamTrees or any other environmental organization, please do. Like I said at the beginning of this video, we all contribute to climate change. All of us. You're contributing by watching this video, I'm contributing by recording this video, and through the million other things that we do throughout a day. It's all of our problem, and it's all of our job to help slow down the effects of climate change. So with all of that said, I want to thank you very much for watching. I'm not going to plug my Patreon here because I feel like if you want to support my Patreon, from this video, go support TeamTrees instead. Follow me on Twitter at Pallet_du to keep up on all things Pokemon science. And as always, there's a time and place for everything.